This is my father and me, in the 1970s when I was about 7 years old. But long before I was born, my father had another son. Not a biological son, not an adopted son, but a surrogate son. His name was Bobby Fischer, and now we were face to face.
What's your first name? Jeremy Schaap.
Jeremy, yes.
I hate to, rap people personally, but his father, many, many years ago, befriended me. Took me out to see, I don't remember what.
Knicks games.
Knicks games. And
you were 12.
Acted kind of like a father figure. And then later, like a typical Jewish snake, he had the most vicious things to say about me.
Half a century ago, Dick Schaap, the man Fischer now calls a Jewish snake, often took him to Knicks and Rangers games. Fischer didn't know his own father, who divorced his mother when he was an infant. Bobby was exceptionally intelligent. His IQ was about 180, the same as Albert Einstein's, but he didn't know how to take the subway home to Brooklyn.
He's standing in front of Madison Square Garden, Schaap is.
Jimmy Breslin, the Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist, was one of my father's closest friends.
He's got this kid with him, and he took him to the Rangers game inside. So now he's got to take him home. He said, what are you taking him home for? Because he can't go alone. He doesn't know how to get home alone.
My father and Bobby first met in the 1950s. My father was a young sports writer at Newsweek. Bobby was a chess prodigy.
The amazing Bobby Fischer. Barely 15 years old, he became a grandmaster, youngest ever to receive that coveted acknowledgement from the International Chess Federation.
But Bobby was isolated, immersed in a world defined by 32 pieces and 64 squares, cut off from his peers. His brilliance and single-mindedness soon made him the most feared chess player in the world, and my father proudly chronicled his ascent, first in print, then on TV. When Fischer would return to the U.S. after vanquishing yet another grandmaster, my father, almost invariably, would be waiting to greet him at John F. Kennedy Airport.
I got your reservations at 2 places. At the Park Sheraton, yeah, and at the Drake, which is a lot nicer and a lot more quiet, if you want a place that's quiet.
When Fischer spoke to the world, he often spoke through my father. Such was the case in 1972. When Fischer was preparing to challenge the world champion, Boris Spassky of the Soviet Union.
What do you do to prepare specifically for Spassky? Will you review his games?
Yeah, I'm gonna work on it. I'm gonna be very well prepared.
Fischer played Spassky in the summer of 1972 in Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland, the rugged island nation in the North Atlantic. At a time when the U.S. and the USSR had thousands of nuclear missiles aimed at each other's cities, Fischer versus Spassky was much more than a chess match.
It was one man, one American, standing up to the entire Soviet Union.
William Knack covered Bobby Fischer at Newsday and Sports Illustrated.
This was the one world title, the one thing that they coveted more than anything else, and we knew that. We knew that all you had to do was read the newspapers or the magazines, and you knew that this was the Russian game. And we sent one guy. I mean, it was almost like Odysseus. I mean, it was like this one guy on this quest, and we sent him into the battle.
Over the course of 2 months, with tens of millions of people following his every move, Fischer didn't just win, he crushed Spassky. When it was finally over, Fischer's first interview was with my father, who'd flown to Iceland to cover the match.
How does it feel now you have the world championship, you're the best in the world at what you've devoted your life to? How does that feel inside?
Feels pretty good, yeah. I mean, my goal now is to play a lot more chess. Handicap, and I have the title.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to City Hall for Bobby Fischer Day.
My father was the master of ceremonies when New York honored the new world champion.
Bobby, how did you enjoy it, the reception?
It was really wonderful.
Not long after Bobby Fischer Day, my parents threw a party for Fischer, which I don't remember, I was only 3, but at which I've been told I met the world champion, who was still only 29. Already, though, he was a hero of the Cold War, with the cultural cachet of a rock star. But Fischer never capitalized on his triumph in Iceland. Instead, he vanished without explanation. He stopped playing competitively and forfeited the championship. He moved to the West Coast and joined a fundamentalist cult. He stopped speaking to many of his old friends. Still, in 1979, when my father was on a trip to Los Angeles and staying at the famously palatial home of Wilt Chamberlain, he called Fisher.
First thing out of Bobby's mouth, "Are you really at Wilt's house?" And Dick said, "Yeah, I'm at Wilt's house." He said, "Oh man, I've always wanted to see that house." Dick said, "Well, would you like to come for dinner?" And there was this silence, and Bobby finally said, "No, I can't do that. I'm not seeing people."
In the 1980s, Fisher further secluded himself. He started spouting anti-Semitic diatribes, despite the fact that his mother was Jewish. He said the Holocaust never happened. As Fisher shambled around the streets of Pasadena, California, my father was often asked to assess the former champion's state of mind. Despite their shared history, he once said, quote, "Bobby doesn't have a sane bone in his body." Finally, in 1992, at the age of 49, Fisher emerged from seclusion. For a $3 million payday, he agreed to a rematch against Spassky. But by playing in war-torn Yugoslavia, Fisher was violating international sanctions.
He came back without explaining why, demanding his own rules. Draws do not count, for instance. Match lasts until one man wins 10 games. Spouting anti-Semitic remarks at a press conference, and holding up the letter from the U.S. Treasury Department warning him that he is subject to fines and imprisonment for violating UN sanctions against Yugoslavia, and spitting on it.
That's my answer.
Fisher defeated Spassky again, but after the match, he couldn't return to the U.S. He became a fugitive, hopscotching from Central Europe to the Far East, surfacing only occasionally, usually on the radio, to rail against the U.S., against Jews, and against the game of chess. Just a few hours after the attacks on 9/11, Fisher appeared on the radio in the Philippines.
This is all wonderful news. It's time for the U.S. to get their heads kicked in. It's time to finish off the U.S. once and for all. This just shows you that what goes around comes around, even for the United States. The U.S., I want to see the U.S. wiped out.
3 months later, my father died at the age of 67. He hadn't spoken to Bobby Fischer in more than 20 years. Last summer, Fischer, still a fugitive, was arrested in Japan as he tried to board a flight to Manila. After more than 8 months in a detention center, he was released 3 weeks ago. The Japanese put him on a plane bound for Iceland, which, in an extraordinary gesture of gratitude for his performance there 33 years ago, had granted him citizenship. On the flight back to the scene of his great victory, Fisher railed against the U.S. and Israel.
The United States is an illegitimate country. It still belongs to the American Indians, to the Native Americans. And the white people, the black people, the Asian people, everybody should leave. The country should be returned to the American Indians. Just like the abandoned state of Israel, the Jews have no right to be there. It belongs to the Palestinians.
I flew to Iceland, determined to be there when Fisher arrived. For most of the last decade, I'd been tracking his movements, hoping for a chance to find him and talk to him. I wanted him to explain what had happened. I also wanted to talk to him about my father, with whom he'd once been so close. Now it seemed there was a chance. When he flew into Reykjavik on a small private jet, I was there waiting for him, along with about 200 others. I introduced myself as Jeremy Schaap, Dick's son.
Mr. Fisher.
But Fisher was hustled away in a Range Rover. I didn't know if he'd heard me. The next afternoon, though, Fisher held a press conference. As he entered the room, freshly shaved, I had no idea what he would have to say. I had no idea if he remembered my father. But without my prompting, he immediately brought him up.
Well, what is your name?
Jeremy
Jeremy what?
Schaap.
Your father was Dick Schaap, you were telling me last night?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I knew him, yeah. He rapped me very hard. He said that I don't have a sane bone in my body. I didn't forget that.
I don't think he meant it literally.
He said it, whatever he meant, he said it. He was very mean. He was Jewish, right?
He was.
Yeah.
As are you.
Really? Have you read my letter to the Encyclopedia Judaica Jerusalem?
I have not.
1984?
No.
Well, read it. It's on the internet.
What did it say?
I wrote them that I am not today, nor have I ever been a Jew. And they wrote me back, giving me a clean bill of health. This is back in '84.
What do you mean by a clean bill of health?
I told them not to put my name in the Encyclopedia Judaica anymore, and they said they wouldn't do it.
While I continued to ask questions about violating the sanctions against Yugoslavia, about his reclusiveness, about 9/11, Fisher returned again and again to the same topic.
The U.S. is totally Jew-controlled. They say there's only 6 million Jews in the U.S. It's a lie. There's at least 25 to 30 million Jews in the U.S.
How do you know that?
How do I know it? Well, just from my studies.
I mean, how would you study that?
Well, I've read a lot of books.
Finally, I decided there were no more questions to ask, that I would never know why Fisher had become what he'd become. But Fisher still had questions for me.
Get back to this guy. What's your first name? Jeremy Shack.
Jeremy, yes.
I hate to, rap people personally, but his father, many, many years ago, befriended me. Took me out to see, I don't remember what.
Knicks games.
Knicks games. And
You were 12.
acted kind of like a father figure. And then later, like a typical Jewish snake, he had the most vicious things to say about me.
I have to object.
Okay. Did you read what he said about me in that article?
I heard things that he said about
Did you read the article where he said I don't have a sane bone in my body?
Honestly, I'm not sure if I read it, but I know that he said it.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't know that you've done much here today, really, to disprove anything he said. I left the press conference more sad than angry. It occurred to me later that while I'd come to Iceland to talk to a 62-year-old man who'd once been the best in the world, maybe the best ever at what he did, all that I found was a scared teenager who still didn't know how to get home to Brooklyn. More than ever, Bobby Fisher is lost.